When I was in Tennessee, I worked with the Institute and therefore worked with the young single adults and therefore worked with priesthood leaders who also worked with young single adults. The high counselor in the Nashville stake that was responsible for the YSA branch there was a friend by the name of Greg Dibb. Greg, if you're out there, love you. Thank you for this lesson. He worked for Nissan at their headquarters in Nashville. And I can't remember if he was supply chain or something, but he taught me a principle he knew from work called clock speed. And what he meant by clock speed is in certain businesses there's processes, but they don't all take the same amount of time. Some things are time intensive and takes a long time to accomplish. Others, you can get it done in a heartbeat. And yet when you're trying to build a car, for example, and you want everything to come off the assembly line right at the end, well, if you want all the processes to end at the same time, you can't start all those processes at the same time because some take longer than others. Does that make sense? Now, he wasn't trying to help me understand Nissan's supply chain. He was trying to help all of us understand working with YSA. Because he said, in family wards, it's slow clock speed. You typically have lots of time. The family's there, it's stable. These primary kids are going to grow up and become youth and so on. You can afford to be a little slow when it comes to callings and so on. He said, with young single adults, it's not that way. It is such a fast flying clock speed. Within the course of a semester, they can move in and change jobs and get engaged and break off the engagement and move several times. There's no more quick moving group in the church than young single adults. And so Brother Dibb was always focused on, we got to be faster. We got to help them get callings their first or second week in the branch. We got to move. Some things you can afford to do slowly. Other things you have to be fast. That principle, I think, is described beautifully in section 24 with 3 verses at 3 different clock speeds. This is interesting. Look at verse 6, for example. And it shall be given thee in the very moment what thou shalt speak and write, and they shall hear it. Jump ahead to verse 18. And thou shalt take no purse, nor script, neither staves, neither 2 coats, for the church shall give unto thee in the very hour what thou needest for food and for raiment, and for shoes and for money and for script. And then go back to verse 16. I know I'm jumping around here. Go back to verse 16 where it says, it shall come to pass that whosoever shall lay their hands upon you by violence, ye shall command to be smitten in my name. And behold, I will smite them according to your words in mine own due time. Now, I'm less concerned right now about the original context of those 3 verses. That's why I'm pulling them out, kind of cherry picking. That can be dangerous at times, but I'm trying to see a more relevant application for us than what might meet the eye. So I'm less concerned that first verse was for Joseph Smith about certain things and that those later verses were about missionaries in general and so on. I just want to focus on the timetables in those 3 verses. Did you see the common thread about timing in each one? In the first one, you saw in the very moment. In the next one, we saw in the very hour. And in the third, we saw in mine own due time. I went out of order in the verses so we could put them in order of duration. How fast is the clock speed? In the very moment, that better be quick. In the very hour, it still needs to be pretty prompt, but you got a little time. In mine own due time, it sounds like we got all the time in the world. And notice the promise that is connected to the clock speed. What will he give us in the very moment? What to say, what to write, how to respond. When he says, open your mouth and it shall be filled, yeah, it needs to be quick. Now, I got to be quick on my feet. And they asked and I open and it better come. Because if it's in the very hour, instead of the very moment, then that's like me in junior high when somebody rips me during recess and I can't come up with a comeback until after school when I'm home. That's the worst. You're like, oh yeah, and they're already long gone. Okay, that one needed to be in the moment. It only came later in the day. With me on that? The second one in the very hour. What's the promise? Don't worry about what you're going to eat, how you're going to clothe yourself, the church will provide. The Lord will provide. But when will the provision come? Sometime in the very hour. It doesn't have to be in the very moment. You can go hungry for a little while. I'll make sure I come through for you before it's too late. But if I need to test your faith by prolonging the moment, don't worry, it will still come in the very hour you need it. And then that third and final one, the longest one, mine own due time, what's the promise? It's consequences for people's sins against you. It's, okay, so they rejected you. All right. Or even worse, they persecuted you. Okay, I'm sorry. I am a God of justice, though, and justice will be served. But I'm also a God of mercy in hopes that they'll repent. I'm a God of patience. I hope that both parties are learning some things here. When all is said and done, it will all be fair. It will all be made right. But those promises will come in mine own due time. You don't need retribution immediately. You don't even need me to right the wrongs this hour. In fact, it may not even happen in this life. But trust me, as we've seen from everything we've been reading so far about patriarchal blessings and little revelations and so on, trusting God's timing is as important as any other part of this. Elder Maxwell once said, part of saying to God, thy will be done, is also saying, thy timing be done. Or as I often tell parents of prodigals who are waiting patiently or not so much for their children's return, there are 3 P's that we've got to trust. Trust God's power, trust God's process, and yes, trust God's pace. Often that third one is the hardest one of all. And certain promised blessings we want in the very moment. If they don't come, hold your breath and hold on to your faith for the hour. And if they still haven't come in the very hour, then trust a God who understands an eternal clock and an eternal clock speed. If we can trust an eternal one, then whenever the blessing comes, it's the right time for that blessing. We can bank on that.